I stood in the doorway of the Aspen Chalet at 11:51 at night. Don't worry, my husband Julian told Selena in the living room. Maya is way too mature to make a scene about our arrangement. Right on cue, his phone pinged on the hall table. A message from his family chat mocking my famous rigidity. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I didn't cry, I just opened my mental ledger. Have you ever been told to be mature when your gut was telling you something was wrong? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. I walked silently into the hallway and picked up Julian's unlocked tablet. The screen illuminated the dark corridor, casting a pale glow across the hardwood floor. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. For 7 years, Julian had weaponized the concept of maturity against me. Whenever he crossed a line, neglected his commitments, or took suspicious weekend trips with his female business partner, any objection I raised was met with the same calculated sigh. He would look at me with manufactured disappointment and tell me I was acting juvenile, that I needed to be the evolved, mature partner he married. It is a brilliant, insidious trap. Weaponized maturity is designed to pathologize your perfectly normal reactions to disrespect. If you get angry, you are unstable. If you demand boundaries, you are controlling. The only way to win their twisted corporate game is to shrink yourself, to suppress your instincts, and to swallow the betrayal with a polite smile to prove you are a rational adult. I had been the silent investor in his version of our family, continuously pouring my emotional capital into a massive deficit. I'd funded his ego and underwritten his lies, but tonight the fiscal year was officially over. I carried the tablet into the guest bedroom and closed the door. I didn't confront them in the living room. A confrontation at 11:53 at night would be reactive and emotional. I required proactive, immediate restructuring. Julian and Selena thought my silence meant compliance. They weren't shocked by what they had done behind my back. They were banking on the fact that I would keep playing along, absorbing the losses so they could reap the dividends. I opened Julian's contacts. I scrolled until I found the number for Elijah, Selena's husband. Elijah was a good man, a hardworking architect who had stayed back in Denver to oversee a commercial build, while his wife supposedly attended an intensive corporate retreat with my husband. He was completely unaware of the luxurious lifestyle his wife was funding with her time away from home. I drafted a message from my own phone, keeping my tone perfectly cheerful, bright, and impeccably mature. Elijah, Julian, and I are putting together a surprise anniversary celebration for Selena up here in Aspen. We would love for you to come up and shock her for Christmas dinner tomorrow. I have a guest suite prepared. Let me know if you can make the drive. I hit send. It was delivered and read within 2 minutes. Elijah replied almost immediately, "That is incredibly thoughtful, Maya. I will leave at dawn." I locked my phone and placed it flat on the nightstand. There was no hesitation. There was no panic. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of absolute control. This was not revenge. It was accounting. I had just invited the primary stakeholder to our intimate holiday getaway. The board of directors was assembling, and Julian was about to face a hostile takeover. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the room, booted up Julian's tablet, and began the audit. The next morning, Julian and Selena left early to go skiing, laughing loudly about hitting the fresh powder before the lifts got crowded. They left me behind under the guise of letting me rest. As soon as the heavy front door clicked shut, I opened my laptop and connected Julian's tablet to my secure drive. I spent the next 4 hours functioning as a silent auditor. I had been monitoring these files for months, waiting for the perfect moment to compile them, which is why I could synthesize the evidence so rapidly today. My meticulousness, the very trait Julian and his family constantly mocked as rigidity, was now my sharpest weapon. They had always told me I was too rigid, too obsessed with the details, too focused on the fine print. But conducting a full audit on your own life is the ultimate act of self-love. When you stop viewing your meticulousness as a flaw and start recognizing it as a defensive perimeter, everything shifts. Paying attention to the details isn't a weakness. It is the refusal to be gaslit. It is the active choice to value your own reality over the comforting lies sold to you by a toxic partner. By examining the receipts, you validate your own intuition. You stop asking why they do not love you and start looking at exactly how much their deception is costing you. I pulled up the joint business accounts Julian and Selena shared. I bypassed the standard operational ledgers and dove straight into the wire transfer histories. It did not take long to find the discrepancies. Over the past 8 months, there were consistent recurring payments categorized as external consulting fees. I tracked the routing numbers with clinical precision. They led to a dummy limited liability company registered under Selena's maiden name. The total was exactly $17,000. $17,000 diverted from their firm's operational budget to fund luxury ski chalets, first-class flights, and high-end dinners. I stared at the glowing screen, my expression perfectly blank. For years, I had quietly supported Julian. I had paid our mortgage from my project management salary during the early days of his startup. I had eaten cheap takeout and skipped vacations so he could build his dream. I had laid a stable, solid foundation, and he had built an entirely separate life on my back. Now I realized our marriage had been a subscription with me footing the bill. I downloaded the bank statements, I exported the wire transfer confirmations, I compiled the emails where Julian and Selena discussed covering their tracks using fabricated vendor invoices. Every click was a brick removed from the fortress of lies he had built around me. The chalet was equipped with a high-end office station, a feature meant for remote executives, which I had quietly synced to my laptop the moment we arrived. I printed 3 copies of the ledgers using the chalet's wireless printer. I placed them in crisp manila folders. A good project manager always comes to a meeting with deliverables. When Julian and Selena returned at noon, their faces flushed from the snow and their voices echoing with shared secrets, I was sitting by the fire reading a book. "How was your morning, Maya?" Julian asked, kissing the top of my head with practiced ease. "Extremely productive," I replied. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I simply smiled, knowing the exact hour his empire would fall. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Elijah sent a text to the group chat I had created earlier that morning. "Just past the highway exit," he wrote. "See you all in an hour. Can't wait for the surprise." Julian was pouring a glass of wine in the kitchen when his phone lit up on the marble counter. I watched his eyes scan the message. His hand froze in midair. The wine bottle clinked harshly against the rim of the glass. The colour drained from his face with satisfying speed, his manufactured confidence evaporating into pure terror. "Maya," he said, his voice dropping to a frantic, breathless hiss as he hurried into the living room. "What is this? Why is Elijah coming here?" "I invited him," I said smoothly, not looking up from my book. "It is Christmas. I thought it would be a beautiful surprise for Selena to have her husband here to celebrate their anniversary." Julian ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting toward the hallway where Selena was presumably changing out of her ski gear. "Are you insane? You need to call him right now and tell him not to come. Tell him the roads are bad. Tell him you made a mistake. Do it now." "The roads are perfectly clear, Julian. And I did not make a mistake." He stepped closer, towering over me in an attempt to use his physical presence as leverage. "This is exactly what my family talks about. You are unstable, Maya. You are acting completely unhinged. You cannot just invite someone's husband to a private corporate retreat." "It ceased being a corporate retreat the moment you brought your mistress to my family vacation," I replied calmly. I turned the page of my book. Selena walked into the room, sensing the immediate shift in atmospheric pressure. Julian quickly explained the situation, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. Selena's face hardened. She marched over to me, crossing her arms, attempting the same corporate intimidation tactics she used to bully subordinates in her boardrooms. "Maya, you are going to call my husband and tell him the event is cancelled. You are crossing a massive boundary. If you do not fix this right now, I will make sure you regret it." I looked up at her. They weren't shocked by what they'd done. They were shocked that I'd stopped playing along. "I am not calling anyone," I said, my tone eerily pleasant. "Elijah will be here in less than 45 minutes. I suggest you both figure out what you are going to say when he walks through that door." You are a psycho, Julian spat, pacing the floor like a trapped animal. He pulled out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he desperately tried to draft a message to Elijah. I wouldn't bother, I added. Elijah is driving through the mountain pass. He won't have cell service until he pulls into the driveway. You have 45 minutes to get your story straight. I will be in the kitchen, prepping the roast. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my trousers. I left them standing in the centre of the room, their panic palpable, their carefully constructed reality fracturing into pieces. They had expected tears. They had expected me to beg for answers. Instead, I had simply invited the truth to dinner. The panic in the living room was a symphony to my ears, but the audit was not yet complete. While they scrambled to invent a plausible cover story for Elijah, I returned to my laptop. The $17,000 in fraudulent consulting fees was a clear violation, but my analytical mind demanded I follow the money to its absolute conclusion. I reopened the exported bank statements, running a cross-reference against the firm's corporate tax filings that Julian kept backed up on his cloud drive. As I aligned the spreadsheets, a secondary, far more lethal twist revealed itself. This was not just an affair funded by corporate misallocation. It was systematic embezzlement. Over the course of 3 years, Julian and Selena had not just been siphoning money to pay for weekend getaways, they had been intentionally and artificially inflating vendor costs on massive government contracts. The dummy corporation registered under Selena's maiden name wasn't just receiving $17,000, that was only the current fiscal quarter. The historical data showed transfers exceeding $250,000. For a small firm, a $250,000 leak is a catastrophic failure that triggers an immediate federal investigation. They had been skimming off the top of federal grants awarded to their firm. I stared at the digital paper trail, tracing the routing numbers that linked their fraudulent invoices directly to a pending federal compliance investigation. Julian had mentioned weeks ago that the firm was undergoing a routine government compliance check. It was not routine. I had already caught wind of the upcoming audit through a contact, so I knew exactly what he was trying to hide. The authorities were already circling, and Julian had been desperately trying to bury the discrepancies before the investigators found the bottom of the ledger. I knew the subpoena was likely already being drafted. Julian was running out of time, trying to burn the evidence before the notification hit his desk. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. I had been married to a man who not only betrayed my vows, but who was actively committing federal crimes. If the authorities seized his assets, my name was on our joint accounts. My credit, my home, and my future were tied to his sinking ship. He had not just broken my heart, he had weaponized my financial stability. I immediately contacted my personal banking institution and initiated a freeze on my individual assets. I transferred my personal savings to a newly secured account. I was severing the corporate ties. I printed the new set of ledgers. These pages detailed the inflated government contracts, the dummy corporation, and the $250,000 deficit. I slid these into a separate red folder. This was the lethal discovery. Julian and Selena had believed their intelligence was superior to everyone else's. They thought their corporate jargon and manufactured maturity made them untouchable. But numbers do not lie, and ledgers do not gaslight. I walked back into the living room, holding the manila folders and the single red folder. Julian was pouring himself a glass of whiskey, his hand trembling so violently the liquid spilled over the rim. Selena was pacing the floor, biting her nails down to the quick. "He is pulling in," Julian croaked, staring out the front window at the headlights illuminating the snow-covered driveway. "Excellent," I said, placing the folders neatly on the centre of the dining table. "Dinner is served." The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime slicing through the suffocating tension in the chalet. Julian stood frozen by the window, his glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Selena looked as though she might be physically ill, her perfectly manicured facade entirely shattered. I walked past both of them, my posture straight, and pulled open the heavy oak door. Elijah stood on the porch, covered in a light dusting of snow, holding a bottle of expensive champagne and a gift wrapped in silver paper. His face broke into a massive, warm smile. "Maya! Thank you so much for putting this together," he said, stepping inside and pulling me into a friendly hug. "Selena is going to be so surprised." "She already is," I replied, stepping back and gesturing toward the dining room. Please, come in. We have a lot to catch up on. Elijah walked into the main room, shaking the snow from his coat. His smile faltered the moment he saw his wife and my husband standing on opposite sides of the room, looking like cornered prey. Selena, Julian, is everything all right? I walked to the dining table and picked up the first manila folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shed a tear. Elijah, please take a seat, I said, my tone professional and detached. I invited you here tonight because we needed to have a stakeholder meeting regarding the future of our respective marriages. Elijah looked at me, confusion knitting his brows together. He slowly set the champagne on the table. Maya, what is going on? Julian and Selena have been having an affair for the better part of a year, I stated, sliding the manila folder across the polished wood toward him. This folder contains the hotel receipts, the flight confirmations, and the text messages. But that is only the personal liability. Maya, stop, Julian shouted, lunging forward. I shot him a look so cold it anchored his feet to the floor. Sit down, Julian. Elijah's hands trembled as he opened the folder. He stared at the printed messages, the irrefutable proof of his wife's infidelity. A heavy, devastating silence filled the room as his heart broke in real time. But there is a secondary issue, I continued, picking up the red folder. While they were betraying us, they were also embezzling from their firm. Specifically, they have siphoned over $250,000 from federal government contracts into a dummy corporation registered under Selena's maiden name. I slid the red folder on top of the manila one. The federal investigators are already conducting a compliance check when they find this, and Julian and Selena will be facing federal prison time. I am showing you this, Elijah, so that you can contact an attorney immediately and protect your personal assets before the government freezes everything attached to her name. Julian collapsed into a dining chair, putting his head in his hands. His power was entirely gone. The illusion of his superiority was shattered. Selena didn't weep like a victim. She stood there, her face ashen, frantically scanning the papers for a loophole, her composure finally shattered by the realization that her career and her freedom was over. They had thought I was a supporting character in their drama. They had no idea I was the one conducting the audit. Elijah sat in stunned silence for a long time, the red and manila folders resting under his shaking hands. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the champagne bottle across the room. Like me, he was a pragmatic man. He simply closed the folders, tucked them under his arm, and looked at his wife with absolute disgust. I will have my lawyer contact you on Monday, Selena, Elijah said, his voice hollow and final. He turned to me, offering a stiff, grateful nod. Thank you, Maya, for everything. He walked out the front door, leaving the champagne and the silver-wrapped anniversary gift behind on the table. He turned to leave, and in his haste, he left the champagne and the silver-wrapped gift on the table symbols of a celebration that had died the moment he walked through the door. The sound of his truck engine starting and fading into the snowy night was the final nail in the coffin. I turned to Julian and Selena. They looked completely broken, stripped of their corporate arrogance and their weaponized maturity. There was no more gaslighting left to deploy. The balance sheet was in the red. The silence that followed Elijah's departure was heavier than any argument. I let them sit in the ruin of their own creation for a full minute before I spoke. Here are my terms, I said, folding my hands together. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate our primary residence in Denver. I have already contacted my attorney who will be delivering the divorce papers on Monday morning. If you attempt to contest the house, the savings, or any of my personal assets, I will personally hand deliver this red folder to the federal investigators. Julian looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot, his face a portrait of utter ruin. Maya, please, we are going to lose everything. The firm, the money, our freedom. Please don't do this. I did not do this, Julian. You did. I simply balanced the books. I didn't wait for a response. I walked into the master bedroom, packed my bags with methodical precision, and carried them out to my car. I drove down the mountain in the quiet dark, leaving them to scramble in the ruins of their own making. Over the next 48 hours, they frantically packed their belongings, turning on each other in the process. Without their shared superiority to bind them, Their relationship dissolved into mutual panic and bitter accusations. A week later, I was back in my own space. The house was quiet, clean, and entirely mine. The locks were changed, the accounts were severed, and the divorce was proceeding uncontested. Julian and Selena were currently drowning in legal fees, desperately trying to mount a defense against the impending federal indictment. Sitting in my living room with a cup of hot tea, watching the winter sun stream through the windows, I felt an incredible sense of peace. When you are in a relationship with a toxic person, they train you to accept a deficit. They convince you that your needs are too expensive, that your boundaries are unreasonable, and that their betrayals are just the cost of doing business. They audit your personality, picking apart your flaws, telling you that you need to be more flexible, more accommodating, more mature. They keep you so busy defending your own character that you never stop to look at their ledger. But the moment you stop defending yourself and start looking at the facts, their power vanishes. We allow ourselves to be audited by toxic partners because we are afraid of what we will find if we look too closely at the reality of the relationship. We are afraid that the truth will cost us everything we have built. But the truth doesn't cost you everything. The truth pays you back. It gives you back your sanity, your self-respect, and your future. Taking back your own narrative is the only path to true peace. It requires cold, clinical honesty. It requires you to look at the people you love and evaluate them based on their actions, not their potential. I had spent 7 years being the silent investor in a fraudulent marriage, but I had finally closed the account. I had liquidated the toxic assets and reclaimed my life. I've come to realize that holding on to anger is just another way of paying an emotional tax to someone who has already bankrupted you. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. I don't forgive Julian because he deserves it. I forgive him because I refuse to carry his debt into my future. I am moving forward, lighter, wiser, and completely in control of my own bottom line. The books are balanced and the audit is complete. If you've ever had to audit your life to find the truth, leave a yes in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice.